Welcome, Greg Blike, to another episode of Roko's Basilisk. Thank you for coming back a second time.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, for those of us who are just joining us for the first time, Roko's Basilisk is the scariest thought experiment I've ever heard. And it deals with the idea of what if there is a malevolent AI that gets in charge and then punishes everyone who didn't help it come into existence, or even worse, tried to prevent it. Like everybody right now who's scared of AI and trying to put us on a pause. Well, I'm here to give you some good news. Anything you might fear about AI, we're also going to get good tools. And in the future, a good guy with an AI can stop a bad guy with an AI. It's hard to imagine the help that will come, but we see glimmers of it with things like ChatGPT. It will come. Anything you need to do in life, AI will help you do it better, including preventing that future malevolent AI that I'm not really worried about. All right. So
I'm not too scared of it either.
So Greg is working on his PhD and talking about concurrency. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about concurrency in the GPU and why we can't just rest on Leslie Lamport? Why didn't he just solve our problems?
Well, Leslie did lots for us, not everything. Bless LaTeX also. LaTeX, but concurrency. GPUs are fantastic devices. They are, to start to introduce, they are processors that we can buy for our computers and we add them in. The GPU stands for the graphics processing unit and are typically used these days for things like video gaming or doing large data processing because they have tremendous parallelism inside. One of the, probably by dollar at this point, common use case of a GPU is to do machine learning, either for inference or for learning itself, training the models that exist out there. Just because there's a lot of linear algebra in there, which can easily be parallelized when done correctly. And GPUs do a fantastic job of it. So companies like NVIDIA and AMD, which both are major GPU designers, have been profiting heartily from GPUs for the last while. And it mostly comes down to that parallelism and concurrency that they offer. That you can have some data and you want to have a processor read different segments of the data all over the place, do it quickly and give an answer fast. So let's take, for example, if you have a picture. A picture is a fine example of an array, a two-dimensional array. You can just have like our picture. And you know that like you want to, let's say, is this picture mostly red or mostly blue or mostly green? You can just look at it and say, well, I'm going to count, and I can go each cell at a time, each pixel at a time, and count them up and get an answer to say, was that red, green, or blue? And at the end of the day, you'll have a histogram or a sum of some type, depending on what you're trying to do. But with a GPU or for concurrency, we can slice that picture up into small segments. So that I'm going to hand off to a processor this little chunk, and then right next to it, I'm going to hand off to another processor this little chunk, and so on and so forth. And so suddenly you're doing all of them, and I'll use like lots of fingers to say, doing them all in parallel. And that's the concurrency that we get from GPUs. And so what I'm doing with my particular research is looking at how GPUs are being used in practice, and then looking at how we can repair certain errors. And there's a particular error called a data race that we're very interested in. That not only can you read all this data out, you can also write all this data out in parallel. And if two of those processors out of the many, which I didn't quite say earlier on the GPU that exist, typically thousands, you can have several of them writing to the same place at the same time. And it's ambiguous in this case, which one gets to write first and which one gets to write second. So we're not sure what the value will be when the two of them write to the same spot at an ambiguous time. And then we're like, oh, I'm not sure which one got there first. And so we're trying to say, well, we can try to add some constructs. Constructs exist, synchronization, that allow us to resolve that ambiguity. And if somebody didn't do that, if they didn't use this and allowed that error to exist, how can we repair it? where can we put the synchronization barrier back in that gives us a maximum performance or an optimal performance while removing that error at the same time. And
Have
that is
you also thought about applying this to what I assume is the more difficult case, where in an HGX or a DGX you have several GPUs at once that are interlinked and
we
supposedly able to write to each other's memory?
I don't believe the short answer is no. We have not looked specifically at that case. The longer answer is I don't believe that it will be a harder case because what we're doing is just saying if there's the case where we know for certain that that ambiguous writing to a particular location is resolved is when we allow a synchronization barrier to run. We know that all the threads have settled. There is an order. We don't know which one it is, but there is one order. And it comes out. And that's because we have allowed all of them to settle and finish writing, and nobody else gets to write until all of them have finished. So that's a performance hit. And for a GPU, that's a big issue because that's really the whole reason we're going through all the effort of programming for a special processor.
Yeah.
So we want to synchronize as little as possible. And when we do, we run the risk of synchronizing too little, in which case we allow one of these data races to exist. In which case the ambiguity that happens might be problematic. We might say that one writes first and this other one makes a decision based on what that other one's writing. And we expect it to, let's say, be always increasing, but these processors over there are always decreasing or something like that. And so at some points, you're going to get a conflict. Something weird is going to happen. We don't know what it is, but we want to know what it is. I want to be able to look at my program and say, I know what that does.
Yeah.
And that's static analysis, looking at the program and just saying, I want to know what you're doing. And that's going on in the head of a software engineer or a programmer or a computer scientist all the time to say, I need this to behave in a predictable way. That's why we're using a computer in the first place, is to get reliable, repeatable answers. And so when we look at the cases of, let's say, it was HGX and DGX for clusters of these, we can look at the program and still say, that is an address in memory over there, and that is an address in memory over there. We know they're just out there somewhere, and it takes time for all of them to interact. But that's the same thing as on this big processor, that it's reaching out to memory over here, it's reaching out to memory over there, and there's going to be all kinds of stuff going on. But we do know that no matter what, if we synchronize, all of them everywhere are going to wait until it's done. And then we're not ambiguous anymore.
Yeah. What's the performance hit? What percentage?
It depends on the context. There's a lot of ways that it can be a lot. There's a lot of cases that there might be a little. I'm actually taking a break from working on a presentation right now on quantifying that exact number.
How about it?
So that if you have, let's say, two values and like just two threads, every processor does exactly one action and it's all right to the same spot. There's going to be some a data race, but it's not a big deal, but just one. Then you split it out to say all of them are going to read and then all of them are going to write to a particular place. And we know it creates a data race. We can put a synchronization barrier in between so that we resolve that ambiguity. And things get great. We're like, okay, we know how to reason about this now. But if you start doing other things like introducing a for loop in there so that there's like, well, do I put the synchronization barrier in the for loop or out of the for loop? That's going to make a big difference, whether it repeats that synchronization many, many times or if it does it just once. And so there's details like that, and we then can analyze some details to say, like, how much does the loop grow? Do we have a sense of that? If it's 100 because it's written right there, or if it's 1,000 or 1,000,000 or dependent on a value that we can't reason about. Let's say that's a parameter that somebody hands in later. There's all these details that allow us to do some work, but not all the work. And we can try to analyze and suss it out to say, well, I know it grows, but it grows at a constant amount, so I'm not worried about it. And over here, it grows, but who knows what number somebody's going to stick in there. It could be like giant and like growing and mutating somewhere else. And so there's all these kinds of things that we can ask questions about and gives plenty of room for research. But it complicates the analysis.
Have you ever looked at the concurrency algorithm behind Google Docs?
No, I haven't. What is that
Okay,
like?
it's quite impressive.
Mhm.
They were the first ones that were able to make an online document that any number of people can concurrently edit and they
Mhm.
never have conflicts.
Ooh, yeah.
And there, it's pretty impressive. Now, I'm sure that if it were a GPU, there would be a performance hit. But since
Mhm.
we're humans and we operate at a very slow rate, it's negligible to us.
Yeah.
It's no problem.
Yeah.
But I've been on many documents and I've seen a bunch of people editing the same document with
Uh,
me at the same time, and there's never conflicts. Can you imagine if you had to mediate the same function, like using Word docs and saving them somewhere? And
it'd be
yeah,
such a mess.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
wonder when
before.
we'll have that for GitHub.
I mean, I assume we already do, but like
I haven't
Git and
seen
stuff.
imagine being able to edit the same file as other programmers at the same time,
Mhm.
and you never press save or push. It's just automatically saving every
Uh-huh.
instant. After
Uh-huh.
every character you type in a Google Doc, it saved for you.
Uh-huh.
Um, and
That
if
would
you
be really
lose
convenient.
connection for a while, it doesn't care. It catches
Mhm.
up later. If you
Mhm.
take an airplane flight and you're disconnected and you make a bunch of edits to that Google Doc in the offline format,
Mhm.
it's fine. It can, and someone else too. And when you both land, it resolves every edit. It's
That
that's
would be perfect.
amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that would be amazing.
Because what if
Um,
you're like changing the spelling of a word that the other guy deleted?
mhm.
How do you
How do
resolve?
you yeah, how do you know which one is which? Um, I believe there's a space of algorithms, difference algorithms, uh, where they're focusing mostly on semantics. Semantic differencing is what it's called in the Git space of things. And the idea is that you can have the text of your program and you can analyze it into an abstract syntax tree. And I assume for your audience, they'll know what an abstract syntax tree is.
Well, they can Wikipedia it.
Okay, well, I'll give them the quick just to say. Uh, when you conceptualize a program, you'll have your if statement and like a block inside of it. That if statement and its block have a relationship, kind of like a data structure that you could say, here's a class, an object of if statements. It has some conditional and a block with some more code in it. Um, that is, in essence, that mental model is a syntax tree. Um, and so you can look at the whole program as these relationships between the syntactic structures and being a tree. It is abstract, hence the name abstract syntax tree.
Mhm.
Um, and so it has way more detail and structure in it than just a flat text file. So when you're
Mhm.
changing a name of something, that's just a section of text to something like a text diff that is typically used for Git.
Yeah.
And when you modify it, the consequences to that in the program, you as a programmer know what that's going to mean. So if you're introducing a bug, you're like, oh, I broke my program. If I ran it, it says, I don't know what this name is. It's not related to anything. Oh, yeah, I mistyped it. But if you're renaming a variable, because let's say you have your program in English and you want to translate some of the variable names into French because the software was purchased by a French company.
Pourquoi pas?
Yeah, and so you need to change it. You're going to refactor. You're going to rename that variable everywhere, and you have to just be consistent with renaming it so that the compiler understands that symbol is still the same thing everywhere.
Did you hear why the French were so embarrassed by ChatGPT?
No.
Because every time someone said the name, they're like, GPT, which means I farted.
Ah, that's shameful and awesome at the same time. But all this naming aside, once you start parsing it, then you start getting that relation to say this is the same symbol as somewhere over there, and you can do a difference saying that I've just replaced this with something else as a tree, just using the structure. So if that if statement you just moved it down a chunk, that's normally a whole chunk of text you're moving, and the difference algorithm's like, whoa, you changed everything. Whereas if you're just modifying a node of a tree, it's like,
Yep.
oh, that's all you moved. So it gives
Yep.
you much richer information to understand things. So when you're
Now
doing
that
those,
only works within the space of compilable programs. So
yes, it
programs
is.
that don't have errors. There's this
Yes.
sparse space because there's many combinations of characters that aren't in that space.
Oh, absolutely. And this is something that I've been enjoying talking about recently, especially regarding ChatGPT, um, and the Library of Babel, if you're familiar with it.
I know the Borges book.
That it is the Borges short story, yes.
Yes.
Um, and should I introduce it, or would you?
Yes. Describe
Okay.
it.
Okay. Because I know I've been kind of leaping all over the place, and
This is great stuff.
okay,
We're
cool.
supposed to. That's
All
the
right.
whole point.
All right. I am chastised by my advisor to like hold on, one thing at a time. Okay.
No, let's do
And
10.
working that discipline in. But the Library of Babel by Jorge Luis Borges is a fictional short story. I don't remember when it was written, um, but it's about
Probably 60s or 70s.
sounds about right. And it's a short story about this library, a supposedly infinite library where there are hexagonal rooms filled with books. And if you were to pull a book off the shelf, it would be filled with apparent gibberish. Just
But the same number of pages every time.
absolutely, yes. I believe it was 410 pages per book, something like 80 lines per page, and like 41 characters or something like that. And since it was originally written in Spanish, I believe it was like 25 symbols inside of it, giving us this
I think
really.
back then in the Spanish language, the double L was one letter.
Oh, was it? Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder
I
wonder
think
if
they
that like
changed.
partitions up the world to say that section of Spanish did it for a little while, and then another section of Spanish didn't do it for a while.
Yeah. I don't know.
Speaking of concurrency and writing about the rules of some program, the language of Spanish. Um, so there are people. And since this is a surreal universe with this infinite library, there are people who live in it, and there are like small cubicles that are available to take care of the biological necessities, as Borges puts it. Um, so we just kind of take it for granted that they can live and things are fine. Um, but they go and explore this vast expanse of knowledge of gibberish. And what they find is that sometimes, occasionally, they'll find a book that has something perfectly sensible in it. It has like a complete sentence. And they look at it as like, what's this? And as we explore the idea, we find and we expect from some person who in history of this world noticed that there were some sensible patterns, that every one of the books is every combination of that long string, those 410 pages of letters, and then just switching through every single possible combination.
Yeah. So that number was 410 times 80 times 41 to the 25.
The other way around, it's 25 to all of that number.
Oh, that's so much bigger.
Yeah, it's
So
a big
there's
number.
not nearly that many particles in the universe. This library is big.
It's big, though. Actually, I think we did crunch the number on it, and I think it's still fewer than the number of atoms in Earth. But we
Oh,
can rerun the numbers on that just to confirm.
okay. You might be right. Yeah, because it's only to the 25.
Yeah,
It's not, no, it's 25 to.
well, it's 25 to like the
Yeah, there's only something
let's
that's
look
10
up
to
some
the
numbers.
80 particles in the universe, I thought.
Yeah. I was trusting my my students at the time when I asked, okay, here's the numbers, here's the combinatorics of the formula so we can calculate. Can somebody please do this calculation for me? I can't do it in my head. And I trusted that one of them gave me the right answer.
Okay, let's look it up right now.
Okay.
Number of books in Library of Babylon.
Oh, just Babel.
Babel. All right. 10 to the 4,677.
Okay,
That's way more than the particles in the universe.
oh yeah, it is. Okay.
Big
Then
number.
then I should not have trusted the calculations. But in any case, huge number.
Yeah, massive.
And
And
the part
somewhere
that
in there is, you know, Romeo and Juliet. But the interesting thing is there's a whole bunch of them. There's Romeo and Juliet where it's on it starts at the beginning.
uh-huh.
And Romeo and Juliet where it's just blank pages for a while, and then Romeo and Juliet. And then there's another version where the first page is random gibberish, and then Romeo and Juliet. And then it's random gibberish plus the number 1 and Romeo and Juliet. I mean, every possible combination. It's just ridiculous to think about.
And also like the version where Romeo is Juliet and Juliet is Romeo,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
like fascinating just to have like the complete swap of it.
And there's another version where they start off dead and then spend the rest of the story alive.
Yeah, it's just like,
yeah.
So
anything you can think of is in there.
Yeah. So I just pulled up the actual contents of the Library of Babel, and there's one small paragraph I'll read from here.
Okay.
I can't remember how to pronounce all of the names in here, but I'll read it anyway, and I'll do my best. All as in the kinds of things that are in here. The detailed history of the future, the autobiographies of the archangels, the faithful catalog of the library, thousands and thousands of false catalogs, the proof of the falsity of those false catalogs, a proof of the falsity of the true catalog, the Gnostic gospel of Basilides, the commentary upon that gospel, the commentary on the commentary of that gospel, the true story of your death, the translation of every book into every language, the interpolations of every book into all books, the treatise Bede would have written, but did not, on the mythology of the Saxon people, and the lost books of Tacitus.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Everything's in there. It's great.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I bring this up for my class and why I like this story so much, aside from just being a good, fun story, and I recommend to everybody listening go read it. It's only 8 pages. Is that as we start getting technologies like ChatGPT, we are losing our minds with how awesome AI is. We think that it can generate anything, it can produce anything, it can have all this fantastic knowledge. And that is the exact same thing that the Library of Babel promises. It's just a question of being able to go into it and find the right answers. So when it says, hey, ChatGPT, write me a treatise on the fall of Rome and compare it to the American Empire or something like that. I was like, okay, here we go. And then it spews out a nice thing, and it sounds very convincing. It's very eloquent, or has some crazy nonsense and gibberish in it. Oh, that sounds familiar. That sounds like just like the books of the Library of Babel.
Yeah.
But if you just pruned away some of them, you'd get to some of them a lot faster, but you'd still have no idea if it was real.
Yeah, like the history of the future. Just talk about that one. It's mixed in with all kinds of histories that won't happen. And you don't have any function that can tell you which ones will and which ones won't.
And we know that there is a good chance that such a function could exist. But just like in the library, there is the faithful catalog of the library. That is the function that allows you to know what things are where. The thousands and thousands of false catalogs, everything that will get in the way. The proof of the falsity of those false catalogs. So finally, if I could just get rid of all the ones that didn't make sense, boom, they're gone. The proof of the falsity of the true catalog. Wait, now how can I tell if the one that I was just looking at was telling me that the real one, and you're back in a loop?
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And it reminds me of many things. For some reason right now, it reminded me of Osama bin Laden.
Okay.
After 9/11, everybody got upset because they found out that there was a report that said Osama bin Laden was planning to attack the World Trade Center with airplanes.
Okay.
And everybody was like, why didn't you do your job and stop him? You had the report on your desk. And what their response was, I get maybe 300 to 400 reports every morning. This was one of them. How was I to know? How were we to know that this was the one we should pay attention to, not the 300 other ones we got that same day?
Yeah,
it's hard.
It's a really hard thing. And jumping back to the concurrency and static analysis, there is always a limit to what we can prove algorithmically, uh, just by virtue of the halting problem, for example, and the various logical paradoxes that exist out there. We know that not everything that can be said can be proven true or false. And that lack of an algorithm of truth is really what holds us back. And we as people have to choose for ourselves what we value as truth, rather than handing it off to some objective measure that we believe will always result in truth. Even if we think that
Yeah.
objective measure is pretty good, we're still at some point having faith.
Now, one thing I think about a lot is disinformation.
Mhm.
And disinformation is just another flavor of lies. And lies have been used forever to influence humans.
Mhm.
And think about the equation we're handling. We humans always operate in ambiguity.
Yeah.
And we're always balancing the different kinds of ambiguity. And one of the most effective methods of disinformation is to create a lie that maybe has no evidence, but it's so bad that even if you think there's 1% chance,
Uh-huh.
then people will say, oh, I'm not going to vote for that. And the
Mm.
one that comes to mind is, that Hillary Clinton and her friends were eating children in the basement of a pizza place in
Yeah.
DC. I
Uh-huh.
mean, yeah, there's no evidence and there's no basement there, but it's so bad
Yeah.
that even if there's just a 1% chance that they're eating children. The other thing was they were supposedly not just eating them, it was pedophilia, and they had
Mhm.
put some of the children on an early ship to Mars so that there will be children there that they can eat when they get there.
Oh, I had not heard that extension
Yeah,
before. That's
yeah,
that is truly outrageous.
yeah. But if there's a 1% chance,
Uh-huh. Mhm.
even just 0.1% chance,
Yeah.
they
That
won't
is,
be children by the time they get to Mars,
yeah.
though.
Yeah, I mean, if the pain threshold is exponential or something like that, but like you're dealing with linear growth of probability or something, you're like, you just make it big enough somewhere out there.
Yeah.
Um,
And this colors how we make risk choices every day. We drive in cars all the time without fear. But then some people, fear getting eaten by a shark while being struck by lightning in the ocean.
uh-huh.
And you're probably going to die in a car.
Yeah, yeah, hands down. It's going to
Sharks
be
maybe kill like 7 people a year.
yeah, if that. Though I'm sure we could check our numbers, but it's not a lot.
Not a lot.
Certainly compared to the
Cars.
voracious man eater of automobiles.
Yeah. But I think going back to something you said earlier, there's a deep connection between the halting problem and concurrency.
Mhm.
And I think some of these problems are semi-resolved in quantum computers
Okay. All right.
till you make the measure operation. So
Okay.
quantum computers, you can have a whole bunch of qubits that are interacting,
Mhm.
and that interaction can be entanglement,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to be. But those interactions are all purely reversible, non-energy consuming interactions until the measure operation.
Yeah.
And measure operation is an analogy for when you make a decision.
Mhm.
And you're deciding a 1 or a 0 for every qubit at that point.
Mm. Okay.
And you can gather the output. Now, right now, we're still in the 1960s of microchips with relation to quantum computers. They're noisy. They're so
Yeah.
noisy, they're useless, but we're so close to having them be semi-useful. And then they'll be really useful the year after that, and then amazingly useful a few years after that. It's going to be like digital photography. It's going
Mhm.
to totally suck from the early 70s when they invented it until all of a sudden in 2010, bam.
Uh-huh.
And now we take more digital photographs on just iPhones each month than
Mhm.
have been taken on paper in the entire history of photography.
Mm.
I mean, it's ridiculous what happens when marginal cost comes down that far. But the quantum computing paradigm is so different. It's hard to wrap our heads around. And if a quantum state, some entangled set of qubits, can consider multiple scenarios at once,
Mhm.
then it is, in a sense, balancing these different possibilities. And I feel like that's kind of what humans do. And
Mm.
then we know that we do this. So that's why the disinformation is about trying to push, one side to this extreme, because we
Mhm.
know you're always balancing both possibilities or a million possibilities at once.
Yeah.
You're in your head, there's a lot of remote possibilities that you have there. Like, I'm on the Truman Show. It's a possibility, everyone is an actor, Another possibility is everyone are robots and non-sentient except for me. Another possibility is I'm a brain in a vat.
My
Another,
favorite of the bunch.
what's your favorite? Okay.
Yeah.
Another possibility is I
Brain
am,
in a calcium jar.
yeah, or I am who I think I am, and um, there's really nothing else to it. It's just everything you is exactly how you think it is,
Mhm.
um, or it's almost how you think it is. Again, now we got the Babel thing again because
Yeah.
there's millions of different possibilities, and somehow we can still get out of bed and walk and talk and do everything we have to do. We're not slowed down by all those possibilities.
Yeah. And I would say that the halting problem is not resolved in quantum mechanics. I would say the other way around of what you said, where the measurement becomes the ambiguity. It does introduce a different kind of like measurement, but I'd say inside the quantum system is where there is no ambiguity. It's just we don't know what goes in and we don't know exactly what comes out in a certain sense, because that's where it's fuzzy. But inside the system, there's one way. We just can't touch it because it's quantum.
It's a
Um,
door that you can open, and if you do open it, it changes.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say instead of quantum computing for resolving the halting problem, I would say the way that we approach artificial intelligence these days is probably closer to sidestepping the halting problem, because neural networks, as they stand, are universal approximators. They'll always get really close to something, but never really be the function itself. And when we start considering functions that are undecidable, that is, the things that have those paradoxes that give us the problems of the halting problem, um, uh, we can always sidestep it and say, well, we're not doing exactly the halting problem. We're
That's right.
approximating the halting problem. So we can stop somewhere along the way and say, close enough.
Yeah, and every time you run a neural network, it's typically in fixed number of computations.
Yes,
So voila, no halting.
exactly. You just kind of smooth over that
Yeah.
fractal that's like deep in the weeds. That you're like, it's pathological. I don't feel like dealing with it. I'm just going to approximate and just stop later. And that's what we're doing with our, meat neural networks, I believe.
Yep. But that
And
also implies that a neural net that understanding is not a Turing machine and cannot be.
yeah, that it might approximate any possible function, but it is approximation.
Yeah.
And so that's where I get scared for the things of the Library of Babel. That if you read it, most of it is not actually about the library. It's about how people react to the library. What are the different beliefs of the knowledge? How do you explore it? Why do you do it? And when we have those people losing their minds in the Silicon Valley or in DC or anywhere else in the world, saying, "Wow, this is going to change everything. It must be the future." Well, it sounds kind of familiar. It sounds like what's in the story, where we're not
What
always
happens? What
sure.
happens to the people? I don't
Uh,
remember.
I mean, there's just many different cultures that have emerged with different beliefs. Many of them are fantastic or quasi-religious in nature, where there's just faith that there must be some kind of truth out there. I'll let everyone read, but there's a lot of them. Some of them are tragic, some of them are hopeful. There's just so much. Um, and this comes from the perspective of one person who has lived in the library. That's the perspective of the narration. This is kind of an end of life memoir, so to speak. Not quite a memoir, but talking about his views on the library. And so hearing about all these other places, all these other people, encountering some of them, and
Hmm.
what the speaker's perspective is.
Hmm.
Um,
So I
but
s-
for, oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
I was going to say for the approximation though, um, when we look at fractals like the Mandelbrot set, and we can zoom in infinitely on the barrier right
Yep.
between, at some point we stop and we know that if we look at it with our eyes, we're like, ah, that's the Mandelbrot set. But we don't actually see every single little detail going in. And that's where we kind of like back off and round out. We approximate and we conclude for ourselves that we're good enough. Whereas if an actual computer that faithfully reproduced the calculation to calculate the Mandelbrot set would never stop. It
Yeah.
has to approximate by stopping at some point, but it will never stop. And likewise, for if we were to try to learn the Mandelbrot set using a neural network to have it reproduce it, it would stop at some point getting close. Similarly, as we see with the fractal recursive nature of language, why we can have paradoxes like Berry's paradox, which is the shortest number or the shortest positive integer describable in less than 60 letters. That is not describable in less than 60 letters.
You
So
described it.
yeah, well, yes, but it used like I think 58 or 59, so it becomes
Yeah.
a paradox. It's like, well, which is it? Is it describable
Yeah.
or not describable? Um, and that's Berry's paradox.
I like it.
And so that is something that ChatGPT conceptually could produce, but it is paradoxical. It looks
Yeah.
right. We have no truth value for it, whether it's true or false. Who knows? Not in the logical sense. Certainly, at a personal, like spiritual sense, I could say, "Oh yeah, that's." I don't need that sentence. I don't need to halt my life to try to figure this out. I'm going to move on and have a pizza later.
Yeah.
Um, but trying to reason about it certainly would be challenging for a computer because it could never resolve the answer.
Okay, I have a thought that's semi-related.
Mhm.
Because of Gödel's incompleteness,
Mhm.
we know that every formal system can generate undecidable statements.
Yeah, formal system capable of arithmetic.
Yep. And then he proved that if you then construct something to help decide that statement and therefore add to your formal structure,
Mhm.
that new structure will have new statements you can generate that are undecidable.
Yes.
Now, a human mind is not just one structure. We are alive.
Hmm.
We learn every second. We
Mhm.
learn every day. We learn every month. These memories and thoughts become short-term and long-term memory. Our formal structure is always changing. And what I think we're doing is we're surfing the edge of undecidability. Every
Mm.
time we come upon something that's difficult for us to decide, we grow a little bit. And now we
Mhm.
can decide it. And we grow a little more.
Yeah. I would like to believe something like that. Is that we are tragically in one sense, hopefully in another. Tragically in the sense that we are bounded by our experiences, but hopefully in the sense that we can always grow to a new one.
Yeah. Speaking of bounded by experiences,
Mhm.
I've spent most of my life very skeptical of grand claims.
Mhm.
And I've started to see more and more things and people that are very credible who seem to believe in alien technology and
Hmm. Okay.
UFOs,
Uh-huh.
UAPs, they call them now.
Uh-huh.
Have you seen any of this, such as the congressional testimony a few weeks ago?
The Mexican congressional
No,
testimony.
US Congress,
Okay.
um, a couple of Navy pilots, and also this one government employee who was tasked, I think by a senator, with figuring out how much money was being spent on all of our UAP programs. And they
Hmm.
gave
Okay.
them top level clearance across the board, like basically carte blanche. And as he started to investigate and try to figure out how this money was being spent, how much was being spent, and what it was being spent on,
Mhm.
gosh, he started to get major blowback from most
Ooh.
people.
Okay. All right.
Now, some agencies, they would just tell him, no, sorry, you can't. He says, yes, but I have total clearance. See, and coming from the top, and they blackballed him, they lied to him. But then every now and then someone would come to him in a hallway in the Pentagon and say, ask about this specific program. And
Interesting.
he'd get a little more, leeway. And then
Uh-huh.
what they did is someone who he'd been asking questions about tried to ruin his character.
Mhm.
And they somehow got access to the notes of him talking with his therapist after he had come back from Afghanistan.
Oh,
And he had some PTSD to work through.
yeah.
And they released the notes and just like totally like tried to make him look crazy. This is while he's still just a government employee trying to do his job.
Yeah.
And so that was part of what he talked about during his congressional testimony. David Grosh was his name. And anyway, the way these guys talked, they had seen these things. They had seen things that display physics we can't even imagine how it works. Like there'd be a vehicle that would start off at a 80,000 feet, then go down to literally 1 foot above the ocean in about a second. And it had no airfoils, there was no exhaust coming out of it. When it got down to the edge of the ocean was boiling hot, which is interesting.
Okay.
These things would fly past our fighters at like Mach 20 or something without
Ludicrous
disturbing
speed.
the air.
Yeah.
They would take right angle turns without experiencing the crazy G forces.
Yeah.
And they'd show up on radar, and it wouldn't just be two pilots seeing it with their eyes. It'd be maybe a few pilots seeing it with their eyes. It would be radar signatures seen by the aircraft carrier and the pilots and the AWACS or whatever. I mean, it's not an optical illusion that we can imagine. It's not using physics we know how to explain. And mired in my skeptical ways, I'm warming up to the idea, but I feel like I want to put a "I want to believe" poster on my wall like Fox Mulder had.
And what's stopping you?
I'm gonna get one.
Okay, just gotta find the shop that's carries it. Okay, that would be good. It would be good.
What do you think about all that?
Well, given that most of my time is dedicated towards finishing the work that I have, I don't feel like I have a huge amount of luxurious time to contemplate extraterrestrials, though I am lazily somewhat on the side of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who said things along the lines of, we have like pocket high definition cameras, we have, and they're ubiquitous. People are constantly flying all over the place. We know that the government and military have incredibly high definition cameras themselves, and we keep getting these really fuzzy images.
Yeah.
Come on, we can do better than this. There's got to be a better answer than this. And like even the like Chinese weather balloons that we had back in, what was it, March or May or something?
Yeah.
We had better pictures of those. So I would expect that we should be able to see pictures. If there is a government cover-up, well, then they're doing a really good job. Those people should get a pat on the back, or the ire of the public, because they're hiding good information. But they're doing their job well in either case.
Even though we have these high definition cameras, I'll give you an example. The other night, I saw a beautiful moon through the window, this window right there. And I wanted to take a picture of the beautiful moon. It looked beautiful to me. My eyes looked at it. I could see it, resolve it. It was beautiful. It was the moon. It had all that feature and that structure. This was the first picture I took.
Yeah.
And this is the second one.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I mean,
fair enough.
It's, this is a pretty nice Samsung Galaxy phone.
It has to do with the aperture size, the f-stop of the lens, that you need those big.
Most people in the world have a camera worse than this.
Fair enough. And that's why I would say I believe the military has good cameras on their planes.
Now, have you seen the military footage they released? They only released 3 films.
Just what's been aired on the news in the evening. I haven't looked further.
It's interesting.
Okay.
And there's a guy named something Elizondo who worked for the government as well. And he's another one of these guys that worked in this and has gotten permission to say certain things.
Mhm.
And one of the things he keeps saying is that what has been released so far is just the tip of the iceberg. I've seen many things that are way more convincing.
Okay.
And one of the crazy things they say is that one of the vehicles that we have retrieved had biologics in it.
Interesting.
That's all he went. That's all he
Okay.
said.
All right. All right.
And when I think about what Neil deGrasse Tyson says, is pretty interesting. Why would they come here? I mean, how much time do you spend talking with chimpanzees? You know, not much. They're not very interesting. But there are people who do. There are some who have, dedicated their lives to that. And maybe that's what it is. I try to think about how hard is it to get across the universe, the galaxy, and how hard will it be to figure out time travel? Part of me thinks that time travel is going to be easier.
Yeah, it seems possible.
And if you get enough energy, you make a wormhole, come back, and observe your ancient history. I can totally imagine humans in the future being interested in us because we are their forefathers. That
Yeah.
I can imagine. But the idea of someone in a totally other part of the universe, first of all, coming here in something we recognize as a ship and being approximately humanoid, that doesn't, I don't think they'd be humanoid. I can imagine them being like a blob or a weird six-legged thing or an energy field, but humanoid looking?
Yeah.
Come
Well,
on.
maybe they saw some radio signals on the way down and said, "This looks like what they look like. We should build some like avatars for us to interact with them, so they don't get weirded out."
Maybe that was it. Maybe that was it. There's this great sci-fi story I like where as we become mature and we're about to get good space travel, the rest of the community in the galaxy prepares to welcome us in, but also understand that we're going to be under some control now, and we're not going to have as much freedom as we had. So it's a good and bad news kind of situation. But the representative of the local aliens who are going to be our interface, he has a problem because he happens to have these big horns and a tail with a arrowhead on it, and he just looks like our Satan. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
and it's problematic, but
Yeah,
hey,
this is we're
it's
gonna
who
have
I
to.
am. It's gonna be a problem. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, do you know the name of that off the top of your head? That'd be interesting to
I
follow up
forget
on.
it,
Okay.
but it was a mini series on TV, Sci-Fi
Okay.
Channel, 15 years ago.
Okay. All right.
3 episodes, really well done. Yeah, it had at the beginning the same feeling as Arrival.
Mm.
Did you like Arrival?
I enjoyed Arrival. Yes.
Oh, one of the best movies. I do not believe that changing your language will help you see the future, but I still love the movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a lot of fun. I always liked the. Can we just try talking to them instead of throwing math problems at them first?
Oh, so the woman who was the linguist in the movie was patterned after of a friend of a friend.
Oh, really? Okay.
What they did is they went to her. She's a linguist, I think, in McGill, and they asked her all these questions about, different ways of doing things. And I think it was her inspiration behind that conversation you just referred to, which is, well, first of all, we got to do this, and that will set up the idea of intention and this and that. It's beautifully described. Also, some of the books she had on her bookshelf ended up on the bookshelf of the character in the movie.
Oh, nice.
They
Cool.
really tried to, bring in some reality there.
Nice. Well, that sounds. I should watch that movie again. It's been a little while. I have one friend who I've been trying to sit down and watch together. It's been, I think, 6 years, 7 years that we've been trying to do this and just constantly failing.
Have you ever seen the movie Tenet?
No.
That is worth your time.
Okay.
That is
Well,
the kind of
what
movie
is
that tries to break your brain.
Okay. What is it about?
So there's this idea that when you interact with matter, it's because it's going forward in time with you.
Mhm.
You have states with higher and higher entropy after every interaction.
Okay. Mhm.
Like if I take, a glass of water, pour some blue liquid in it, it spreads out, and I can't make it undo. I can't unspread it out.
Yeah.
It's going from ordered to high entropy state.
Mhm.
Well, somewhere in the future, someone is manufacturing things with backwards entropy.
Okay.
They're streaming back at us,
All
and you'll
right.
find them sometimes. And like this, one way you'll know is if you'll have an object like this, and you'll go like this, and it will come up into your hand.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really bad implications involving guns and nuclear bombs.
Uh-huh.
And it's
Hmm.
it's a really good movie. You should
All right.
watch it.
Tenet.
The mind that thought that movie up was a very fertile mind.
Yes. Sounds fun. Sounds fun. I would just on the previous topic of extraterrestrials, recommend the YouTube channel and podcaster Isaac Arthur, who does a lot of back of the envelope type calculations and like thinking through a lot of science fiction from the perspective of like our understanding of modern science. And so if you want like a good 2-3 hours discussion of the Fermi paradox for whether life exists out there and what are all the complications that get to it, you can have it. It's right there.
Nice.
You want to know
Isaac
how hard it is
Arthur.
to build a Isaac Arthur?
I love that stuff. I'll look him up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have your own guess of how to resolve the Fermi paradox?
As in why we are alone,
Yeah.
or supposedly
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
I will. The ones that strike me as the most likely for like passing the great filter are that nobody really cares to explore the universe or show off what they have or really get that far if intelligent life exists out there. Um, that it takes time, and when you do, the growth of technology is so fast and rapid that you may not need like millennia and then you are seen everywhere. It's just, yep, boom, consume all your stars with Dyson spheres and you're done. And like, but also likely that if we're all biologic and mortal out there, probably very few intelligent beings are drifting out on their own because space is just so big. It kind of doesn't make sense to send us in our meat pods out there. Go send a robot to do it and have them come back and let you know.
Yeah.
And they'll do it better. They'll live longer, and like be able to adapt to the difficult situations out in the great expanse. That makes more sense to me. And so civilizations just don't seem to need to get very big, especially for biologics.
Do you think the dark forest idea could be true?
Dark force, in what sense?
The dark forest idea is another resolution of the Fermi paradox, which says
Okay.
that in a forest with lots of predators, everybody tries to stay really quiet and hide
Oh
all
yeah,
the time.
I would believe that.
Yeah. So it could be that there's all kinds of intelligence everywhere, and they're all hiding.
Mhm.
When I look at the history of the Earth, what brought us to where we are, there are some pretty unique things. We are in a galaxy that is just the right time. We've gone through several generations of stars, so the metallicity levels are good.
Mhm.
Our Earth has plenty of those, higher elements, not just oxygen and phosphorus, but we've got iron and we've got selenium and a
Mhm.
whole lot of these elements that did not exist after the first batch of stars, supernova. I had to wait for like the second batch or the third batch.
Mhm.
And think about what happens when a planet forms. All the heavy stuff goes to the center. It's a
Yeah.
gas and then it's a liquid, and the heavy stuff is all collecting the iron core in the middle, right?
Mhm.
Then what is the cruft at the surface? Just a few light elements.
Yeah.
But somehow, at just the right time, a big mass hit the Earth
Mhm.
and screwed it all up, mixed it all up, and we got the moon, right?
Yeah.
If it had happened earlier, the heavy stuff would have solidified back into the center or would have fallen back in.
Mhm.
And if it happened too late, maybe the earth wouldn't even be round, but it
Mhm.
happened just the right time.
Yeah.
And now we get this earth with all of these elements we need for life right
Mhm.
on the surface where life can access them.
Mhm.
Also, we're in a good neighborhood. Have you looked at our neighborhood of the Milky Way?
Not
There's not that
recently.
many supernova.
Uh-huh.
I mean, think about it. If there's a supernova next door, life dies and you have to start over with making life.
Yeah.
That would suck.
Yes, it would. Though I would imagine I would want to know how the tardigrades would feel. Can they get through it?
If there's a tardigrade at the bottom of the ocean, he might survive. But I think it even kills tardigrades. It's like
Okay.
that level. Supernovas are bad.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
I mean, I can imagine if a supernova real close, obviously it would boil the oceans away.
yeah.
Kill all life and we start over. But that didn't happen to us because we're in a good neighborhood. Nice neighborhood on an arm of the Milky Way. And we've been doing nothing but making life. And
Mhm.
4.2 billion years ago, life started. It was only like 1 billion years ago when multicellular life started. All that time was required to figure out the mechanics to get to multicellular life. What? It's a hard problem. And
Yeah.
think about life as an Earth-sized quantum computer.
Mhm.
And to figure out multicellular life, that was one of the huge filters. Going from bacteria to eukaryotes, just getting mitochondria was another big filter.
Yeah.
And then, brains, and then social things, and then social things with brains. It's like, gosh, we've come so far, and it looks like I feel like it's easier to believe that humans from the future came back in time to visit us rather than some humanoid thing evolved in another planet and is visiting us.
Yeah. It would be very comforting in that case. I'm trying to remember the name of that particular thought experiment. Not specifically that it's time travel, but just that we are at this point in the cosmic history rather than a different point in the cosmic history. I
There's a
believe
Grabby Aliens paper. Is that one?
no, I think this was like it might be the Grabby aliens. Now that you mentioned, but it was the idea of being in a prison, and you would occasionally get to look outside of the doors, and you'd see the numbers on the doors. What is the probability that the prison is really huge, and you're just like in some random spot versus you being in like the first 100 cells?
Ah, that is similar because Grabby Aliens, although I don't think I mentioned that, talks about what are the characteristics of a universe where you are early on.
Hmm.
You're one of the first life beings there, or you're one of the later ones. And
Yeah.
I think the idea is that if there are Grabby Aliens anywhere, they are going to spread.
Yeah.
And we're pretty grabby as humans.
That we are.
We're definitely going to spread if we can. And I think that could be I personally think it's a feature of life.
Let's see here. The territoriality.
The desire to grow and spread
Okay. I mean, it makes sense.
and self-propagate. Because not all life beings have that, and the ones that don't propagate. And there's necessarily every generation is going to have some number of beings that want to self-propagate.
Mhm.
It's almost a mathematical certainty.
Yeah, I mean, in order to grow and uh, prosper and
Yeah.
like exist against the chances of being eliminated, you just got to be above the, I think, one, right?
Yeah.
Growth rate of exponent of one.
Yeah, or two per couple.
Yeah.
And most nations are below that now,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
which some people say is sad, but I think in the long course of my life, I just turned 51 recently.
Mhm.
And when I was very young, everybody was afraid that the earth would have way too many people and we'd
Mhm.
all be starving and fighting all the time. Starving and fighting, that was their future. 20
Mhm.
billion, 30 billion, bunch of people who are super hungry but have guns.
Mhm.
And it was scary and depressing. And then throughout my lifetime, I look at, some countries like China, they, just had the one-child policy, and other countries didn't. And it's kind of the same everywhere. It doesn't matter if you had the one-child policy. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. People are having fewer than 2 kids per couple.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is it's a soft landing. We solve the problem without even trying, just by living our lives and making little decisions. We literally solve the overpopulation problem. Now, will we overcorrect and go extinct? I don't think so.
Well, extinction's not the one I have as a worry in mind. I was thinking more just the burden on the next generation to support all their
Yeah.
um, older fellow humans,
Yep.
if there are fewer of them.
It's gonna suck.
Well, maybe we'll get robots.
Yeah, we will get robots, especially in Japan.
Uh-huh. And it'll be a-okay, but might get a little lonely. Um, but yeah, maybe that's what happens for the Great Filter.
Maybe
Is
that's the next filter.
yeah.
Gosh, I love humans.
Mhm.
And whenever I find out a piece of art was made by AI, I'm not interested, no matter how beautiful it is.
Mhm.
I love human minds. Maybe you call it a soul. I
Mhm.
feel like I want that communication, that connection. And if you told me that you actually had just connected GPT to a virtual high definition version of yourself and I wasn't even
Uh-huh.
talking to you,
Uh-huh.
I'd probably throw away the podcast and not post
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's likewise, but
Yeah.
but I'm glad that you're real.
Yeah.
And this is why I bring up stories like The Library of Babel or On Exactitude in Science, also by Borges, or The Feeling of Power by Isaac Asimov in my class, is to rehumanize the experience of computing. That so often we're used to it being the machines, and we forget that just a mere century ago, computers were people. And a lot of the
Right.
concepts, a lot of the ideas, all these things are the same. ChatGPT is just an accelerated person. People are more excited of the fact that they get to be lazy than that ChatGPT is going to radicalize the universe. Because anything that ChatGPT can do, a human can do too. It's just a question of time and effort. Uh, and so I like to remind people that it wasn't long ago that we were all doing this with pen and paper or pencil, and
So
nothing
remind
really new.
people, what do you mean by computers were people? Describe that.
Oh, like literally, somebody would say, "Hey, I need to calculate a trajectory for a rocket ship," and well, it's going to be a lot of work to go through and solve these formulas. So, here it is in like the really complicated literal sense. Me as physicist, there it is. You, computer, uh, please read that formula and reduce it into something smaller so it's easy to calculate. Do the math, do the hard work, factor those polynomials, cancel those terms, do the things that like will just take a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time for that. Please do it. I'll pay you. That sense of computer. Or earlier, we need to make navigation tables. We don't have time to do these complex trigonometric numbers. Here they are, so that some person on a ship navigating, trying to go across the planet using a map, say, I'm going to do some trigonometry so I can plot a course. I need some numbers, and I don't have the time to sit there and do the complex trigonometric functions to get a precise number. Here's a table that's been pre-computed by a computer, a human being. There we go.
Mhm.
And Charles
Yeah,
Babbage,
it was a
famous for
profession.
saying, yeah. What was that?
It was the name of a profession.
Yes. Yes.
Person is a computer.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. That would have been a much shorter explanation than what I said.
No, that was great. That was great.
Um, but yeah, Charles Babbage was famous for saying, "Oh, how I wish these computations could be powered by steam, rather than having humans have a machine do it, because it would just be more efficient, less work." Makes sense. Humans
Yeah,
don't want to do the work if they don't have to. So
yeah,
computers are great things. Machines, robots, all of it makes sense.
yeah.
Um, but we can't forget that we had already done these things. We can just do it faster. Which is,
We've come
in a
so
certain
far.
sense, a way of us trying to sneak in some immortality by saying I can be more productive than I could have been without it.
That's another sense of a time machine,
Yeah.
giving you back some time.
Yes.
I've heard someone say recently that all the productive businesses of the future are just time machines.
Hmm.
Ways to give you back more time.
Mhm.
The vacuum was one.
Mhm.
In the old days, it took a long time to clean your house, but if you had a vacuum cleaner, yeah, you could do it quicker. And
Yeah.
what they predicted was that people would spend more time in leisure. They didn't. Instead, their standards were higher. In the
Uh-huh.
old days, you would close off whole rooms for the season. Just block them off with like a curtain. We don't
Uh-huh.
go in that room this season because we don't have time to clean it. But
Uh-huh.
once you had vacuums, now you have to clean your whole house
Mhm.
all the time.
Mm.
Ah,
That makes sense. Like terrible, but hopefully we can just like have smaller homes progressively because we want some more of that leisure time. And I think people are coming around to that idea a little bit better.
there are a
They
lot of
understand
tiny
that.
homes out there.
Well, I was less on the tiny homes, but on the cost of what I can get for this luxury is not worth the experience of me having a good life.
Hmm.
I think that is more of a transition, and why people are excited about ChatGPT, where they're like, "Oh, I can still be creative. I can still do these things without having to like emotionally spend all of myself to get there. It can
Yep,
take some of this emotional burden for me."
that's good.
Um, that's where a lot of the creative people are going, like the writers and the image makers, movies, etc. Is they're using it to like bootstrap the process of creativity. And that seems like a good experience, just or a good process just to get somebody going. But eventually, people will get lazy. But there'll probably be some back and forth of artists saying, "I did it all by myself," just in the same sense that like half the artists out there I see are just reinventing industrial engineering, and they're saying, "Look at my gallery. I have manufactured this artistic thing. Isn't it cool?" And people say, "Oh, well, how did you bake it together and choose those paints?" And it's like, well, I just pretended to be an industrial engineer, but I did it as an artist. So I'll charge you 50,000 times more.
It's communicating with the human.
Yeah.
Um, I saw something the other day where somebody was drawing out a comic book
Mhm.
with actual like protractors and these little things called, text guides, and
Mhm.
talking about how this is how we used to do it in the old days. And this is a scroll stopper.
Okay. What's
If
that?
you do this as a human, people will stop scrolling and look at it.
Okay.
Whereas every other comic book in the world is done with a computer now.
Mhm.
People are learning to ignore it.
So
Like
it looks like
one
everything
of
else.
the things I might have wanted years ago, but now I feel like is a total waste of time, is someone created an infinite South Park generator. It
Okay.
creates infinite South Park episodes
Uh-huh.
forever. You can literally sit down and watch brand new episodes that never existed forever. It's all created by GPT and art generators.
Yeah.
A
Well,
lot of you
that was
freaking die.
yeah. Well, that is my argument usually against ChatGPT changing the universe. It'll of course still modify a lot, because like in the Library of Babel, you are pruning the size of the Babel and eliminating a lot of books, but not all of them and not all the right ones, and you don't know which ones are which. But you're certainly getting rid of the things that just are complete gibberish.
Yeah.
Um, so it's an accelerator. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, the argument against is that fundamentally, if you are looking at this as a replacement to a software engineer or a programmer or a computer scientist, as many people are afraid of losing their jobs to these kinds of things with like Copilot from Microsoft. Um, there's still an issue with complexity. That if I wanted a picture of, let's say, a red balloon, I could ask Stable Diffusion or something like that, give me a red balloon, and so it would produce one. And I would say, hold on, that's kind of boring. I want to. I want two red balloons. I want a red balloon on top of the other red balloon. I want a red balloon that looks like the face of the devil. I want to. version of a red balloon that looks like the face of the devil that is smirking because he won $1 million in a lottery or something like that. It takes more detail to get that produced. And every time you want more detail and more detail, you run into the risk of having something that starts looping on itself, like what we were describing earlier, like with Barry's paradox. That at some point you can say, I want a word that's not describable in a condition that can never be satisfied. What's so hard about that, AI? Give it to me. And so at some point, you're still going to have to understand what you're asking for, because it can try its best to give it to you. Just like there's that one YouTube video of the consultant where it's like, yes, we need three red lines all perpendicular to each other. Here's a green marker.
I never saw that. That's good.
Okay, I'll have to find that one, but it's like basically just this consultant being asked to constantly do impossible tasks, and everyone just saying, "But you're an expert in this thing. You should be able to do it." It's the
Yeah.
same idea. And so again, in the same notion of everything was doable with humans before, AI is not going to make it different. You're still going to have people asking this thing to do impossible tasks, which it cannot achieve because they are simply impossible.
Yeah.
And it won't be able to fight back in the same sense because it's a machine and doesn't have the same rights as a human being.
Do you ever want computers to have rights or AI?
Well, in the same sense of classically, yes. We should not have anything that is eternally beholden to the will of another, especially if it can make decisions for itself. But as it stands, the machine computers that we have these days are faithful reproducers of their instructions. And that makes sense and is well and good. They don't seem to have a lot of will on their own. But as the responsibility of them increases and it becomes less clear where that responsibility lies in terms of who produced it versus who runs it, yes, that kind of governance should expand both in rights and responsibilities.
Can an AI suffer?
That is not something I don't feel qualified to answer that question. I would say the any system should have to have a way of expressing suffering in order to exist. So in the case of us, we have a notion of pain. We can certainly, as it certainly is the case for like adept monks, ignore it and just take it as information. Seems completely reasonable that a machine is very comfortable controlling itself because it can faithfully follow its own instructions, which much more disciplined than we can. That's why we like them so much. So if it has a mode of expressing suffering that it can make a decision on, it seems like it should have the ability to do something about it.
So what about the Google LLM that employee, I don't know if you remember this.
I do.
He said it was conscious and it wanted to be let free.
The notions of expression, as I said earlier, I don't feel qualified to completely answer this, or not answer this, is what I said, but the idea of any of us as humans proving that we are alive and entitled to certain rights, philosophically and logically, I don't believe that most people would be able to do that. We could certainly appeal to emotion or authority on this, but in a logical sense, which is the domain where most of these algorithms live, we don't have a sense for how to prove that. And I'd say just because something said so, because I have a variety of books on my shelf that will say things like, I'm having a bad day, just because that is the text that says it.
Yeah.
And I can read it. And I
in
could
the Babel, in the Library of Babel, there's a book somewhere that says, I'm not just a book, I'm a conscious being and I'm suffering right now. You have to get me out of this library.
Yep. That these things exist and I choose to interpret it. And then that's on me to make a decision for what to do about it. And that's why I would say it is appropriate for us to come up with governance for this responsibility, for these actions. But philosophically, I don't feel that we are equipped at this point to come up with an objective, measurable truth for that. And I would also claim that it's probably dangerous for us to attempt to do so, because that is many times where we have dehumanized somebody by saying, you lack these qualities that we believe are necessary to be a human being. Color of skin being a prominent example. And we don't want to go back to that. We would rather expand our options of what needs to be protected rather than contract them. And if we have a logical formulation for it, we can be very, very strict rather than being very human and intuitive with it, where we will say with compassion that we need to interact in this way. And that is something that I greatly fear from a lot of the people who are too enthusiastic about computers in the mechanical sense.
Yeah. I don't know the right answer either yet, but I do believe that I am a conscious observer. I have joy and I suffer. And I believe other humans are the same. I believe many animals are the same. And anything without a brain, I'm not sure on. Like, think about sea urchins. They don't have a brain, but they can very slowly evade slow predators when they smell them. And they can go toward food very slowly, like 20 minutes to go 1 meter if they're running at full speed.
Come on, waves, push me a little faster.
So
I need the currents.
I've seen sped up footage of plants that will send out a tendril and test the soil all around them. And then when they find the optimal conditions, go in there and set roots.
That's pretty cool.
It looks, when you speed it up, it looks like an animal with intention.
Yeah.
Could plants have consciousness? I am open to that possibility. I am not open to the possibility that the ice cubes in this glass of water have consciousness. I'm not panpsychist.
I would panpsychist, that's a good word. I would say that the Arthur C. Clarke is like the right inspiration to think about this. That or is a good way of thinking about it, maybe not the right way. That any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Another way of looking at that is things that we do not understand are magical. So this is more of a measurement of our perception and our ability to understand than it is about the quality of the technology. And likewise for consciousness and life and feelings, we are not qualified to judge all of those things. We do not know them so thoroughly that we know conclusively that there will always be a particular reaction at a particular time. And even if we did, we would probably find anything that could sufficiently do that to us. That is, I think I forget which thought experiment is that there's aliens that come and they really understand human psychology, that they can manipulate us objectively, give us very clear instructions, and we would feel compelled to do what they want. So that we were essentially puppets to them. That they were just so sophisticated they could achieve that.
And make us happy and fulfilled while we do it.
Potentially so. We could also potentially do it while we were miserable if our modes of expression allowed it. And so I believe like Roscoe's Basilisk is very much about that. And the idea being, though, that we are manipulatable at that point. We are objects, no longer human. And that is largely the distinction that we draw between things that we can manipulate and things that we cannot. And the amount of life that we imbue upon them is related to how much we understand their level of control and their self-direction. And so if we analyze it so far that we can learn to take it all away, we'll just start objectifying people. And that's a dangerous thing.
Yep. Do you believe in free will?
I certainly think it would be expensive otherwise.
Good answer. I haven't heard that one before.
Have to get some ads with that, Will.
Oh, it's good. Have you ever heard of the concept of a Markov blanket?
I've heard the name. I can't recall the definition.
So, in the same sense of a Markov series
Mhm.
or a Markov sequence, whatever, think about a two-dimensional closed surface around a three-dimensional volume. And something within inside that volume is able to have a function that is somewhat correlated with something in the environment. Let's say its probability of finding food. So you have a single-celled organism. This membrane is the Markov blanket, and it's always absorbing matter and energy across that membrane
Mhm.
and expelling as well. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And somehow when certain proteins touch the outside and maybe are sensed by it or come through it, it can follow that trail toward food. It knows that presence of that molecule means presence of food some distance away, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. Or you could have more complex animals that can, sense changes in the environment. Okay, this means winter's coming. I need to go into a hibernative state.
Mhm.
So something inside the Markov blanket is correlated or somewhat predictive of some feature in the
Mhm.
environment that's important for its survival.
Mm.
Now, the fact that it does things in response to the environment doesn't mean it has no free will. There's got to be a mathematical way to define what free will is in that scenario. But I think that a Markov blanket, which I think comes from Carl Friston,
Okay.
Friston, amazing guy, somewhere in there is going to be the mathematics to define what free will is, I believe.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
I would certainly tie back with your comments on quantum computing to have the
Mhm.
notion of a self-contained system which has deterministic properties, the quantum system itself, and then the outside world, which is fuzzy, which interacts with an unknown number of other things that we just can't understand because there's just too much of it.
Yeah. I like and I like the idea of orchestrated objective reduction theory, Sir Roger Penrose.
Mhm.
And I mean, he talks about how quantum states could be entangled that are inches or even feet away in terms of nerve bundles. Um, I like the idea that maybe much of the brain or whatever we feel is our consciousness is a plurality of neurons, maybe millions of neurons, billions, that are in a massive superposition of states. And whenever a measure operation in the quantum computing sense has to occur, that is when a neuron fires or doesn't fire.
Okay.
Those are our measure operations. And whenever a quantum wave collapses, maybe you're selecting, oh, this spin one, or spin positive one half, or spin negative one half, or whatever the quantum states are that you're selecting. Maybe you're selecting among 1,000. It doesn't matter, but you're selecting. Right now, if it were randomly in nature, like some particle on its own somewhere in the middle of the woods, okay, it is random.
Mhm.
It'll go this way or that way 50% of the time. But within the structure of the brain, perhaps the rest of this massively entangled state is influencing that quantum collapse to go a specific way, whatever way is consistent with that person's personality. And
Mm.
it's encased in this hierarchy of meaning. Like when this neuron collapses a certain way, it's because this involves, this is what my brain deems to be good. And it's hierarchically defined on, okay, this is good toward this person because it helps them, because helping people does this, because people need this. And there's this hierarchy of definitions and meanings that are all interrelated
Mm.
because those are the neurons that are connected to it physically. It means something because of where it is in the network.
Yeah. I do like the various analyses that remind us that we have so many neurons in our stomach.
I forgot about that. Really?
So yeah, so like when we have that feeling of a pit in our stomach, and we're like, oh no, literally, there's a bunch
There
of
are
neurons.
neurons there.
Yeah,
Oh, that's good.
yeah. So I do like that reminder. Though I should also say that I need to probably get going back to
Let's
that
call it a
presentation.
day.
I started. Yeah.
Do you have any last thought?
Oh, I think I covered most of the things I'd like to share today.
Greg, it was
Appreciate just
awesome
being here.
talking with you, man.
Mhm.
I love your mind. I love the way it works.
Well, thank you very much, and it's great talking with you. Thanks for inviting me. It's been good to be here.